Why football is the most watched sport on earth, and Americans are just now finding out. There is a sport that can make a city go quiet before the ball even reaches the penalty area. A sport where strangers hug in the street, where a missed kick can follow a player for years, where a goal can turn an ordinary Tuesday into a story a family repeats for the rest of its life. Most of the world calls it football. America often calls it soccer. And for a long time, that difference in language has also felt like a difference in understanding. To many Americans, football has looked like someone else's obsession. The scores are low, the clock runs in a strange way, a match can end tied, and people still argue about it like they just watched history. Fans sing for 90 minutes. Players celebrate one goal as if the planet has shifted. Commentators talk about pressure, shape, rhythm, and space, when to a new viewer, it can look like 22 people passing a ball around and refusing to score. From the outside, it can seem confusing. Sometimes it can seem slow. Sometimes it can even seem ridiculous. Then the World Cup arrives, and suddenly the ridiculous part starts to make sense. Because football is not the world's game because it is hard to understand. It is the world's game because almost anyone can understand the basic idea in seconds, and then spend a lifetime discovering everything hidden underneath it. Put the ball in the goal. Stop the other team from doing the same. That is the doorway. Behind that doorway is identity, history, migration, memory, rivalry, hope, heartbreak, and pride. That is why a match between two countries can feel larger than sport, and why a child kicking a ball against a wall can be doing the same essential thing as a superstar walking into a packed stadium. And that is why World Cup 2026 matters so much for America. The United States is not discovering football because the sport suddenly became important. Football was already important. The world already built rituals around it. The songs, heroes, villains, and arguments were already happening in cafes, kitchens, offices, group chats, and schoolyards across the planet. What is changing is that America is about to host the conversation. And once the conversation is happening in your own cities, in your own stadiums, on your own morning shows, in your own airports, and in your own bars, it becomes much harder to treat it like background noise from somewhere else. The first reason football became so global is almost embarrassingly simple. You don't need much to play it. You need something that can roll, a little open space, and an agreement about where the goals are. Shoes help, grass helps, lines help, but they are not the soul of the game. A ball against a wall can be football. Two backpacks on a sidewalk can be football. A beach, a parking lot, a narrow alley, a schoolyard, a patch of dirt. All of it can become football if enough people agree to chase the same object toward the same target. That low entry point matters. It meant the game could travel with workers, students, sailors, soldiers, immigrants, teachers, and children. It meant football did not need perfect conditions before it could take root. It could adapt to whatever a place already had. In one country, it became organized through old clubs and civic institutions. In another, it grew in the streets. In another, it mixed with school culture. In another, it became a way for working-class communities to be seen. In another, it became part of national independence, national pride, or national escape. The professional game is not simple. At the highest level, players read angles, pressure, passing lanes, and tiny changes in balance that most viewers never notice. But the dream is simple. A child does not need a tactical vocabulary to understand the feeling of scoring. The game welcomes you with simplicity, then rewards you with depth. That is part of why it crosses borders so easily. The second reason is that football works without translation. The language around the game changes, the songs change, the names change, even the word itself changes. But the emotional grammar is recognizable almost anywhere. A last-ditch tackle does not need subtitles. A goalkeeper standing alone before a penalty does not need an explanation. A striker missing an open chance communicates perfectly in every language. So does a crowd holding its breath. Football is one of the few global conversations where a person can understand the emotion before they understand the words. That matters in a world that is usually separated by language, politics, money, and distance. A match gives people a common structure. Two teams, one ball, one clock, one shared anxiety. You can walk into a room where you know nobody, see a chance develop, and react at the exact same moment as everyone else. For 1 second, you are not a tourist, not an outsider, not a stranger. You are just another person who knows the ball should have gone in. That sounds small until you experience it. For American fans raised on domestic sports, this is one of the biggest adjustments. In the United States, sports can be massive, emotional, and deeply rooted. American sports culture understands ritual, but global football adds another layer. A club is not only a team you watch. For many people, it is a place, a family inheritance, a neighborhood badge, and a weekly ritual. Then the national team arrives and changes the emotional temperature completely. Players who are enemies at club level stand shoulder to shoulder. Fans who argue every weekend suddenly sing the same anthem. When people say it is more than a game, they are not saying the game is morally pure. They are saying the game carries more than the score. That is why the World Cup is different from a normal tournament. In club football, the story keeps moving. A bad result can be answered next week. The World Cup is not like that. For players, it may be the only chance at their peak. For fans, it comes with the weight of waiting. 4 years is a long time in a life. A teenager becomes an adult. A young player becomes a veteran. A country changes mood. That waiting gives the tournament emotional force. And then after all that waiting, the matches are short and unforgiving. This is the third reason football becomes so intense. Scarcity. Goals are rare enough to matter. That is not a flaw in the sport. It is the engine of the tension. In basketball, a team can give up a basket and answer 10 seconds later. In American football, a team can lose one drive and still have a sequence of possessions to recover. In baseball, the drama is built differently, through innings and count pressure and accumulated moments. Every sport has its own rhythm. Football's rhythm is built on the possibility that one moment may be enough. One loose touch, one bad clearance, one mistimed run, one pass slipped between defenders, one header from a corner, one goalkeeper leaning the wrong way, one referee decision, one shot that clips a defender and changes direction, one penalty in a stadium where everyone knows the taker will either be remembered or haunted. That is why a 1-0 match can feel unbearable if you understand the stakes. A new viewer may look at the score and think nothing happened. An experienced fan may look at the same match and feel exhausted, because the drama was not only in the goal. It was in the pressure before it, the team pinned back, the midfielder turning away from danger, the fullback stopping attacks before they became highlights, and the manager waiting to make the change that could save the match or lose it. Football asks you to pay attention to threat, not only reward. A shot that misses by a few inches can change the feeling of a match. A forward drifting behind a defender can make an entire crowd rise before the pass is even played. A team that cannot get out of its own half can feel like a boxer trapped on the ropes. A goal that doesn't come can still leave marks. This is one reason Americans sometimes bounce off the sport at first. American sports television is often built around stoppages, statistics, replays, and clear segments. Football is more continuous. The clock doesn't stop for your confusion. If you are used to constant scoring, football can seem empty. But once the rhythm clicks, the emptiness becomes suspense. You start noticing how a team changes after scoring. You notice when a favorite becomes nervous. You notice when an underdog stops merely surviving and starts believing. You notice the crowd before you notice the tactic. You notice the way a player's first touch can calm 10 teammates. You notice the way a stadium reacts when the fourth official raises the board for stoppage time, and everyone realizes there is still enough time for disaster. That is when the sport gets under your skin. It does not always entertain by giving you what you want. Sometimes it keeps it from you until you can barely stand it. Then, when the ball finally goes in, the release is enormous. That is what casual viewers are going to see in 2026. They are going to see countries they barely thought about arrive with supporters who have waited their whole lives for this stage. They are going to see fans treat a group match like a family event and a survival test at the same time. They are going to see famous players carrying expectations that feel heavier than their club salaries, and unknown players become recognizable because they did something brave at the right moment. For Americans, this is the key. The World Cup is not just a collection of good teams, it is a collection of emotional worlds. And America is uniquely positioned to notice that in 2026, because the tournament will be happening in a country built from global connections. Some fans will support the U.S. team. Some will support the country their parents came from. Some will support both until they cannot. Some will discover that their neighborhood had football culture all along. They just weren't paying attention to it. This is another reason the idea that America is new to football is only partly true. The United States has always had soccer communities. Immigrant communities brought the game with them. Youth leagues grew. Women's soccer built a powerful tradition. Major League Soccer became a real part of the sports landscape. American players moved into major European leagues more regularly. Supporters groups built noise and identity in cities across the country. So the story is not that football suddenly arrived. The story is that more of America is finally noticing what was already here. For decades, soccer in the United States had to fight for attention in a crowded sports marketplace. Baseball had memory. American football became a weekly national ritual. Basketball created global stars. Hockey held regional loyalty. College sports turned campuses and states into tribes. There was not an empty space waiting for football to fill. On top of that, the American soccer pathway was often fragmented. Many children played the game, but playing as a child did not always lead to watching as an adult. In countries where football dominates, the game is background weather. It is on television, in family arguments, in weekend plans, and in the calendar. America had the participation, but not always the surrounding culture. Now that surrounding culture is easier to find. A fan can wake up on the West Coast and watch a Premier League match with breakfast. A fan in Texas can follow Liga MX with family and MLS with friends. A teenager in Ohio can watch Champions League clips, learn about a club in Germany, argue about a player in Spain, and follow a young American abroad from a phone. Podcasts, documentaries, tactical videos, social media, fantasy games, and streaming have removed the old distance. You no longer have to wait for a newspaper box score or a weekly highlight show to know what happened across the ocean. The global game is sitting in your pocket. World Cup 2026 will create the biggest doorway yet. Because nothing explains football to a casual viewer like the World Cup. You do not need to understand transfer fees. You do not need to know the difference between every club competition. You do not need to memorize decades of league history. You do not need to pretend you know every tactical debate. The World Cup gives you a simple frame: countries, groups, knockouts, pressure, elimination, glory. It turns the global game into something legible. Even if you only watch for the flags, the anthems, the colors, or the noise, the tournament gives you a reason to care. Maybe you care because of your heritage. Maybe you care because your friend cares. Maybe you care because the match is being played in your city. Maybe you care because everyone at work is talking about it. Maybe you care because an underdog refuses to leave. Maybe you care because a star player is running out of chances. However you enter, the sport has a way of offering another layer. At first, you notice the atmosphere. Then you notice the pressure. Then you notice the players. Then you notice the decisions. Then you notice the spaces between the decisions. Before long, a match that once looked slow begins to feel like a negotiation happening at high speed. That is why the final minutes of a close match can be almost unbearable. The leading team starts seeing danger everywhere. The trailing team throws bodies forward. The crowd reacts to clearances like goals. Every long ball becomes a possible miracle. Every corner kick feels like a coin tossed into the sky. And because the clock keeps moving, time becomes emotional. If your team is winning, the final minutes feel endless. If your team is losing, they vanish. This is where new fans often cross over. They do not become football fans during a comfortable 3-0 match. They become fans when their body reacts to a throw-in the 88th minute, when a free kick from a bad angle feels dangerous, or when a disallowed goal suddenly makes them care about the line of a defender's shoulder. That is how the sport hooks people. Not all at once, then all at once. World Cup 2026 will create those small conversion moments across America. A lunch break match, a watch party, a neighborhood bar packed with flags, a casual viewer turning on the television for noise and staying because the match becomes tense, a family splitting loyalties in the living room, a city discovering that a visiting fan base can change the sound of a street. America is very good at spectacle, but this spectacle will not feel exactly like an American invention. That is important. The Super Bowl is a masterpiece of American sports culture. March Madness has its own chaos. The NBA Finals, the World Series, the College Football Playoff, and the Stanley Cup playoffs all have rituals, stakes, and history. The World Cup is different because the emotional ownership is distributed across the planet. When it arrives in North America, it brings the world's arguments with it. It brings rivalries that started long before the host cities were selected, styles of support that may feel unfamiliar, and a reminder that not every major sports story begins in the United States. For some Americans, that will be the surprise. The tournament will not be waiting to be discovered. It will arrive already full. The job of the new fan is not to make the World Cup important. The job is to realize why it already is. And once that realization happens, the sport looks different. Low scores no longer feel like a lack of action. They feel like pressure. A draw no longer feels automatically pointless. It can be survival, disappointment, strategy, or relief, depending on the table. A player rolling the ball backward no longer looks like cowardice. A defender clearing the ball into the stands no longer looks ugly. It might be exactly what the moment required. Football teaches you that beauty is not always flashy. Sometimes it is a calm first touch, a defender reading danger early, a team moving together, or pure chaos in the box while everyone forgets how to breathe. And that is why Americans are not really being asked to abandon their own sports culture in 2026. They are being invited to add another language to it. You can love the NFL and still understand why a World Cup knockout match feels different. You can love basketball and still appreciate the tension of a single goal. You can love baseball and still recognize the patience of football. You can love college sports and immediately understand why national anthems and flags make people emotional. This is not a replacement. It is an expansion. The mistake would be to judge football only by what it is not. It is not built for constant scoring. It is not designed around commercial breaks. It does not always reward the team that looked better for longer. It can be cruel, slow, and decided by a deflection, a whistle, or a moment of human error. But that is also why it feels close to life. Pressure changes people. Beauty appears without warning. Preparation matters, but so does timing. A person can do everything right and still lose. A person can fail for 89 minutes and then become the hero. Football compresses those truths into a field, a clock, and a ball. That is why people cry over it. Not because they have confused sport with real life, but because sport has given real life a shape they can see. In 2026, many Americans will begin with curiosity. Some will begin with skepticism. Some will begin because the tournament is unavoidable. Some will watch only because friends invited them. Some will claim they do not care and then ask what time the next match starts. And somewhere in the middle of it, the same question will keep appearing. Why does this feel bigger than I expected? The answer is not one thing. It is the simplicity of the game. It is the difficulty hidden inside that simplicity. It is the way football travels without needing perfect conditions. It is the way it carries identity. It is the way goals are scarce enough to feel precious. It is the way a national team can make a country feel present. It is the way an underdog can make the world lean forward. It is the way the clock refuses to stop. It is the way one kick can change a life. And it is the way the World Cup turns all of that into a shared human event. Football is not perfect. No sport is. It can be defensive, frustrating, political, commercial, unfair, and heartbreaking. It can ask for patience and then punish hope. It can leave you wondering how a team survived, or how a ball that looked certain to go in somehow stayed out. But when the moment comes, when the pass is right, when the run is timed, when the shot beats the goalkeeper, when the net moves and the sound arrives, the wait suddenly has a purpose. That is the secret. Football makes the world hold its breath together. Then, for one impossible second, it lets everyone exhale.